Greetings, conservatives. This is your humble host, John Moraga, and we are back with more ConservaCast. We look forward to keeping you informed with the latest and most relevant commentary of conservative issues. So without further ado, here are a few topics I'd like to discuss.
I told you so. Today's ConservaCast may be shorter than some of the previous ConservaCasts that we've produced. Start off by saying, I told you so. What does that mean? What do I mean by that? Well, if you've been following Conservatives Corner or been listening to these ConservaCasts, you may recall way back in one of our very first productions of ConservaCast, episode 3. It dealt with Hezbollah. Now, before I jump into that, I just want to give some background. This is in no way to boast about some of my previous education or experience or research, but as many of you may know, I graduated from the University of Judaism. Currently now, the American Jewish University changed names, but while I was there, I took several courses both in religion and politics, as well as the sciences. In fact, my degree was in bioethics. But the point is that some of the courses I took in politics address, obviously, the Middle East conflict through a Jewish or Israeli perspective. But being very objective academics, the professors definitely tried to encourage getting a well-rounded education and having various opinions. But one of the courses I took, the professor, who I will not give his name out just for his privacy, but he was an Israeli who served in Mossad and was heavily involved in some of the shall we say, covert or not as publicized, rather, or however that might be phrased, tactics and politics and military maneuvers that had gone on in Israel. And he was actually quite impressed with my performance in the class. And my last assignment that we were given was to write a full-on research paper, and it had to deal with a current event or topic within the Middle East and the conflict. And so I chose to take on the topic of the Lebanon-Israel conflict specifically, and some of the tensions that historically have gone on between the two countries and entities. Well, he was so impressed that he called me into his office after shortly before the semester ended, and after he had already reviewed and graded my paper, and was very, very taken back at the work that I had done. Again, this is not to boast as much as it is to say that I invested quite some time into doing the research into this topic. And so much so that he was, as I said, kind of taken back. And he actually encouraged me to perhaps even pursue something professionally within political science at the time. Now, looking back at it now, almost, it's going on nearly 2007. So over 12 years ago, it may have been a good point that I would have pursued something such as that, but I did not. The point is that I have a very, very thorough background and invested quite some time into this topic. So that being the baseline, what I want to say is, again, I told you so, not to sound arrogant or conceited, but because in episode 3 of ConservaCast, for those of you who have listened to us, or even for those of you who haven't, check out our YouTube channel in our playlists. And ConservaCast episode 3, I kind of address the warning signs that are going on in the region by looking at Hezbollah. Now, I believe what I had mentioned then, what I'll mention now, the history of Hezbollah is quite intricate, but for time and simplicity, they are basically a proxy or puppet of Iran, and they have been classified as a terrorist organization. But the interesting thing with Hezbollah and the caveat with them as a terrorist organization is arguably they are one of the more, how shall we say, mainstream or legitimate or accepted or don't know the exact adjective to describe them. But they aren't nearly as radical or impulsive or involved as some of their counterparts, such as Hamas or other factions of the Muslim Brotherhood or other terrorist entities. Excuse me. And so, what I was addressing in episode 3 that I want to address now is they are, in my opinion, a bellwether of what is to come in that region and what will happen in that region. And in Israel, Israel has little blow-ups here or there, or have kind of minor conflicts that may last for a short time. And so outside of their war for independence and the 1967 7-day war, 6-day war rather, Israel has a history of having some minor flare-ups, some of the intifadas and some of the escalations in the West Bank. But for the most part, there isn't a lot of sustained conflict. And what's happened recently is that Hezbollah has fired into Israel, and Israel has retaliated. And as of the production of this ConservaCast, it hasn't escalated to a full-blown war. It hasn't gone on further. In fact, they tried to tamper down some of what has occurred. But it is extremely pertinent that you guys and others stay involved and informed of what will happen in the coming days, coming weeks, coming months with Hezbollah. Because they have been, again, in context, relatively less radical than some of their other terrorist counterparts. Once they get involved, as they just have, once they actually start to lift arms up against Israel, in my opinion, again, from the research that I've done and some of the history of it, it is very significant. It is something that shouldn't be taken lightly. I think what may be happening is that some of the other politics that have happened, such as President Trump putting more sanctions on Iran, basically dissolving the nuclear deal that Obama had made with Iran. Iran is feeling a lot of pressure. They're feeling a lot of isolation. They are, for all intents and purposes, getting pretty desperate. And the recent attack by Hezbollah, being their proxy or puppet, I think is a sign of that, is indicative of that. Because they had to have recently really been pressed on so many other issues or facets that they're now having to resort to one of the more, again, within context, the more reasonable or less radical factions that they control, such as Hezbollah. So, again, I think this is a bellwether of what is to come soon. Recently, Israel has gotten involved in a couple firings or attacks into Syria, Iraq, and they are now, as I said, experiencing some attacks from Hezbollah, from Lebanon. And so with that being said, there is also, interestingly, and I don't know how much this plays into what will be coming up soon, but there is another election coming up that Benjamin Netanyahu will be running in. And so this very well could be a strategic play, but it also very well could just be a much bigger event, an escalation of things to come in the near future. But I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the election for Israel is coming up in the second week of September. I want to say September 14th or 15th, somewhere in that time, maybe the 17th. But in mid-September, in a couple of weeks here, a few weeks, they will be going back to the polls. There was a lot of inner politics that played, that even though there was a recent election that happened, Benjamin Netanyahu was not able to form a coalition government. For those of you who don't know, Israeli politics are extremely, extremely, extremely complicated. If you think American politics are very nuanced and complicated and confusing, baby, you ain't seen nothing yet. I remember going over there every time that I have gone over there. Trying to engage in a political conversation is really hard to do. It's really a futile effort. The reason is that Israelis themselves don't engage in political conversation generally as a culture. And the reason being, I from my experience, is that they don't feel it's worth the time to really have simply just a discussion. Unless you're involved in some way, unless you hold office, or unless you're somebody with extreme influence, everybody's got an opinion, everybody's got their point of view, and so it's really kind of a waste of time to really sit down and try and exchange ideas. And that makes it even more so with foreigners or those who don't live in Israel and want to maybe strike up a conversation about the current events or political issues or races, elections that may be going on. From my experience, at least, that conversation is really diverted. It's shunned. It's kind of suppressed. Maybe let's move on. Let's talk about something else. Let's talk about food. Let's talk about entertainment. Let's talk about something else. Anything but politics. Now, that's not to say that those conversations don't go on. But as a rule, it is more of an exception than the rule. As a rule, from my experience, it's just been kind of, let's not discuss those things. So the only reason why I bring that up is that Israeli politics are just very, very intricate, confusing, complex. And so their system of electing officials is not exactly like American politics, much like any other country has their own unique version. Well, let me reel this back in and kind of gone off topic here a little bit, but just to kind of wrap this up, I just want to draw your attention to that. I just actually, in fact, recently saw a Reuters article about Hassan Nasrallah, who is the leader of Hezbollah, claiming that they want to tamp down the escalation of things, that there's a new phase in what they're looking at as far as tensions. So that being said, we will revisit this another time. I'll give more details about it, but I just wanted to draw everybody's attention to that. And if it doesn't escalate into something much bigger, thank God. Nobody wants conflict. Nobody wants bloodshed. It's just the history of things. The history of the two entities involved in this, specifically, obviously Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon, just something that has really caught my attention and wanted to bring it to your guys' attention. That being said, before I go off onto another tangent there and start talking about other issues that aren't necessarily related, that I'll be probably addressing at another time, I do want to very quickly address two other things. The first is kind of inside baseball of California politics. Now, many of you have likely probably written off California as something that is a dark blue state, and I happen to agree with many of you. It is essentially a de facto one-party system of Democrats in the state. The politics of it, it's just a matter of how far left and liberal the Democrat politician is, or committees are, or legislation is. And my wife, who is a teacher in K through 12, it's really taken a toll on her. At first, it used to be kind of it used to be kind of voluntary to teach certain types of curriculum, and now they are really enforcing and mandating some curriculum be taught, whether that is same-sex relationships, or even more recently, anti-Semitic curriculum such as BDS, boycott, divest, sanction movement against Israel. it's getting really, really, really crazy out here in California, and we are in the trenches. We are trying to be one of the very few voices that are still in California, embedded in the trenches, fighting the good fight. But the politics out here are just insane. And it seems to be not just in California, people are feeling it all over the country, but specifically, we are in the belly of the beast, so to speak, in a lot of things. The current governor, Gavin Newsom, the presidential candidate, Kamala Harris, it really overwhelms me, as you can tell. I'm just at a loss for words. But just keeping you guys updated that we are in a direction of fighting a lot of stuff within the school system, the public school system. And Gavin Newsom, as governor, is trying to do everything that he can to fight against charter schools, which is not a perfect system by any means, but it definitely allows some autonomy for parents to give their children and students a more what is it called? A more flexible and a type of curriculum that can be adjusted for each student, or at least their own class needs. Whereas public schools are exclusively public schools, brick and mortar as they're called, really still follow a cookie cutter type of curriculum and teaching, and this is what you have to do. These are the lesson plans that are given. These are the types of curriculum that are mandated. And although charter schools still have to meet certain standards and the students still have to pass certain tests, there is a lot more flexibility on what can be presented to them. And some of the more mandated curriculum, such as same-sex relationships or BDS, anti-Semitism curriculum, isn't necessarily required in those structures. In fact, there is even types of charter schools that are, they call them virtual academies, where they are essentially online. It's a homeschooling type of system where the students will get certain types of lessons that they learn at home, either with their parents or a babysitter or some type of guardian that will help them. Unfortunately, a lot of times the family dynamics are such that there may be a single parent or an adoptive parent or grandparents in the home. Whatever the dynamic is, it allows some flexibility. But Gavin Newsom, the governor, is really trying to eliminate those, unfortunately, and really trying to enforce the state's will into the types of curriculum and education that is given and provided. And so lastly, the one thing I want to address that's also related to California, somebody had sent me a message and an article regarding the requirement that all gubernatorial and presidential candidates submit their tax returns in order to appear on the ballot. There's legislation. I don't know the legislation off the top of my head, nor do I really care to get that much more information on it. But the point is, somebody sent me an email drawing my attention to it. I had already known about the story before, but I kind of written it off. Because there is just so much of a bias, a political bias and agenda out here that I just assume, well, it's just another nail in the coffin for the state. But just for the sake of bringing that up, because it was sent to me in an email to readdress that. The concern is that how is the down ballot affected if President Trump is not on the ballot for the 2020 election? Because he's not willing to submit his tax returns, and he, understandably, realistically, has already written off California to be so far left. It's not going to vote for him anyway. It would never take place. It overwhelmingly voted for Hillary in the last election. It's probably overwhelmingly going to vote for whoever the Democrat nominee is as well in 2020. So he's not really counting on or betting on getting support from California in the first place. So he can write it off and not submit his tax returns and not be on the ballot. The concern is, how does that then affect the down ballot for other candidates who will be on the ballot, who are part of the GOP, part of the Republican Party in California? And so I had to respond to this person and partly joking, but in all seriousness, that's the least of the GOP's problems in California. Trump not being on the ballot is is minor in comparison to what's really gone on. As I just stated in what I was talking about curriculum, the educational curriculum, this is a one-party system out here in California. It is just a matter of how far left the Democrat representative is and how extreme they are in their positions. But the GOP has been dwindling for the past 2 decades, if not longer, in California. It's no longer the California of Ronald Reagan. It's no longer the California of even Pete Wilson, there were a lot of disagreements with him. But even Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was a former governor, was a joke of a Republican governor. And I mean, obviously it could have been worse. You could always have worse, but he was a nominal Republican at best. And he did have some things that he tried to put forward that would be considered Republican or slightly conservative. But for the most part, he was the last Republican that may be elected as governor anytime in the near future, if not for the foreseeable future. So there's really not a big hope for the GOP anyway. And that was further reinforced in the 2018 midterm elections when California, there were a number of House seats that went to the Democrats in a particular region in Southern California known as Orange County. Many of you may be familiar with that. It used to be part of LA County, Los Angeles County, but separated, I believe maybe the 50s or 60s, and became a suburb or a subsidiary of LA County, but maintain its own autonomy as a county that was smaller. It's where Disneyland is located, Knott's Berry Farm is located, the Angel Stadium is located. So it has its own reputation, but for many, many, many years, it was a Republican/conservative holdout. And ever since the 2018 midterm elections, it flipped. A number of those seats flipped for the Democrats. Some conspiracy theorists, or maybe not so conspiratorial, believe there may have been some fishy elections going on there. But I personally don't know that it was really fishy elections. It very well may have been. I would not be surprised, let's put it that way. But the trend has been that the Democrats have invested time, money, energy into flipping even the most conservative holdouts that have been here in California. Yes, there were and have been up until recently, a lot of them. And in fact, there are still some very unpopulated, more inland, rural parts of California that still actually do have Republicans sitting there on in office. But because it's so overwhelmed by the left and Democrats, they don't have nearly the power that they used to have or need to actually do anything and influence anything. So I'm going to wrap up this ConservaCast. Just wanted to address those things. Keep your eyes out for what may happen with Hezbollah, and please keep in mind stay informed of what's going on out here in the curriculum, pumping our students, our young kids full of propaganda. And it's more just a social engineering than it actually is educating them in objective subjects, math and writing and things that they're actually going to need and use. They're now moving towards more social engineering for them. And lastly, we appreciate your empathy for our lack of Republican and or conservative leadership out here in California. But we hope here at Conservatives Corner to be one of the last vestiges to at least provide the information. If not, if there isn't a political movement, or if there's no longer political clout for conservatives out here, we at least want to be on the forefront of providing you information. Located proudly here in California. It's a beautiful state. There's a lot of things out here that are just gorgeous, and that's why we're out here. But it's gone politically disgusting and ugly. So without dragging this on anymore, thanks for listening again. We'll be back soon with more ConservaCast. We're going to try and produce these more frequently. And I almost forgot. We are still working on getting a collection of recipes. So if you have any recipes to send us, by all means, go to our website, conservativescorner.com, conservativescorner.com. That's again, conservativescorner.com. Just go to contact and send a message to us, and we'll try and compile them in the near future. We'll be posting them up and sharing them and having a little bit of fun with that. On a last final note, my wife and I celebrated our 8-year anniversary this past Sunday. So I am I am very happy for that, and I pray for another 8 years to come. Thanks for listening. God bless you all, and God bless America.
Thanks for joining us once again, and we hope you'll invite your friends and family to join us in our efforts to champion conservatism for generations to come.